Some hesitate to draw close to people of different races or nationalities.
And we call those people, what's the word again? Oh yes, racists.
But they can overcome this by imitating Jehovah's impartiality. The result? Great joy. We'll see an example of this in the following report.
On September 18, 2020, Medicane Janos, a rare Mediterranean cyclone, struck Greece and flooded a Roma settlement in Mavrica, just outside the city of Karditsa.
Local authorities worked alongside emergency services to evacuate over 1,000 Roma who lived there. But a family of 7 who are studying with Jehovah's Witnesses were left behind.
It was raining hard and the floodwaters were rising quickly. I took my wife by the hand and carried my child on my back. With great difficulty, we managed to make it to a neighbouring house. We were unable to contact the authorities. We were terrified and had no option but to stay there.
We didn't know what to do. We were so scared and worried. We had never experienced anything like this before.
The floodwaters had risen a lot, and we stood waiting for hours. I asked my father to pray for us. He did, many times. There were lots of people in the house, both young and old. They were afraid and they were crying.
Video messages from the family started to come through asking for help. We could see their fear. We wanted to help them, but there was no way for us to go there because access was impossible. All we could do was pray to Jehovah for them and send messages of encouragement.
We were very distressed. Children were crying. I prayed to Jehovah, begging him for peace of mind. I threw all my burdens and anxiety of my heart on Jehovah. Soon, I felt calm and had no anxiety. I felt his spirit giving me strength during the hours that followed until dawn.
We're watching the March 2022 JW Broadcasting episode, and we've just heard the story of the Tsakiris family who went through an ordeal when their Roma community got flooded. It must have been a terrifying experience to go through. You can only imagine how frightening it would be to have floodwater coming into your home at night time, no less. And, you know, the threat of exposure to the elements, being carried away by the floodwaters. Goodness knows what was going through the minds of this family. It's a terrible thing that happened to them. But as we've already seen in this JW Broadcasting episode, it's not just about the tragedy, is it? It's not just about adversity and terrible things happening, because adversities befall anyone. And we've already heard in this story that local authorities and emergency services managed to evacuate over 1,000 when this catastrophe struck. So hundreds of people were affected by this. But apparently we need to focus on just one family because of their religion, because they happened to be members of the right religion, Jehovah's Witnesses.
We were given a house to stay in. We were able to calm down and sleep. The brothers gave us food. I thanked Jehovah for teaching us and taking care of us. He is our Saviour.
When I attended the first meeting after the flood, I felt calm again. I tried to keep my routine as normal. Study, meetings, preparing comments. I felt joy and contentment.
My legal documents, such as my ID, were saved from the flood. Our neighbours were not prepared, but we, thanks to Jehovah's direction, had packed emergency bags.
About a week later, we were able to return to Mavrica. The houses were in a terrible condition, full of mud.
The Disaster Relief Committee helped us immediately. Brothers from 300 kilometers away sent emergency supplies.
The Brotherhood showed us love in practice. They worked hard and helped us because they love us. I was deeply touched and found myself in awe. We are united. All of this brought glory and praise to Jehovah.
When we went there to help, the Roma neighbours were very surprised. They asked if we could help them too. We replied that we have to help our family first, our brothers. They were very puzzled that we called our Roma brothers family, since we were not from their tribe.
7 members of the Tsakiris family are studying the Bible. 5 who are deaf are studying with a Greek Sign Language group. When the flood struck, about 20 people, including the Tsakiris family, could not be evacuated due to strong currents. At first, other Roma who had been left behind blamed the flood on the family because they were all studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. But after they observed the assistance provided by the brothers and sisters, they said, "You have the true religion. You show genuine love."
They cannot tell this story, can they, without giving clues as to how insular and self-interested this organization is. And again, this is to take nothing away from the Tsakiris family. I'm sure they went through a terrible ordeal. I'm glad they were taken care of. It seems that this was a fluke scenario where 1,000 people were rescued successfully by the authorities and only 20, including them, needed extra help or got left behind due to circumstances. But the message seems to be, as it always is when they cover natural disasters and the stories of Jehovah's Witnesses caught up in natural disasters, the message seems to be you cannot get through this sort of situation unless you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
My legal documents, such as my ID, were saved from the flood. Our neighbours were not prepared, but we, thanks to Jehovah's direction, had packed emergency bags.
So what's being referred to here is Jehovah's direction for Jehovah's Witnesses to have go bags ready. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you're supposed to have your essential belongings all packed up and ready in case disaster strikes in a go bag. And this is apparently some secret, some incredible wisdom that you can only think of or only receive if you're in this particular religion. There's no possible way you'd think of doing this. You'd think of having emergency provisions or important documents in a safe place. There's no way you'd think of doing that if you're not in this particular religion. Again, the message is, how on earth would you cope unless you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses in this particular situation? If you think about it, it's incredibly condescending to anyone watching this, including the 1,000 Roma who were impacted by this tragedy. It's incredibly condescending to be saying to them effectively, well, if you'd have been Jehovah's Witnesses, it would have been so much easier for you because you'd have had your go bags all packed. And interestingly, the guy doesn't specifically say that all of the other people in the community lost their passports, or even that anyone lost their passports. He's just bragging that he followed Jehovah's direction and his passports were safe. That's not to say that automatically everyone else that got impacted by this tragedy didn't have their passport in a safe place or even lost their passports. And frankly, if they did lose their passports, I'm sure new ones would have been provided. I'm sure it's possible to go through a natural disaster of the kind we're hearing about and not be in the Jehovah's Witness cult. But that message doesn't suit the makers of this propaganda. Then we have this remarkable part of the segment.
When we went there to help, the Roma neighbours were very surprised. They asked if we could help them too. We replied that we have to help our family first, our brothers.
I'm so glad this guy said that on camera and it made it into the cut, because isn't that what I've been banging on about? In rebuttal after rebuttal, whenever they show their response to disasters, whenever they show their aid efforts, the argument I continually make is that it's just about looking after fellow Jehovah's Witnesses. It's just about looking out for people in your club. And how is that anything to be bragging about? Well, here they are bragging about it. It's something that they're very open about. And you can be sure, whenever I need to make this argument in the future, I'm going to be playing this clip. I think that's actually one of the interesting things about cults. Because they are so deluded, the makers of this propaganda, because they are themselves deluded, they are tone deaf when it comes to how this will be received by non-members and former members. They can't see how awkward this message is. Oh yes, we look out for our own. We care only about people who are in our religion. We're not so bothered about helping people who aren't in our religion because, frankly, they're all going to be destroyed at Armageddon anyway. That's the mentality of this group. And as I've repeatedly said, how does it square up with Christianity, with the message of the Good Samaritan? A story or a parable that literally says, here's this guy who was beaten and robbed, and the ones who walked past him were all in his religion. It was only the apostate that came and helped him. That's literally the story of the Good Samaritan. And as I pointed out in a recent video about Ukraine, based on the fact that refugees, Jehovah's Witness refugees, are being greeted by Jehovah's Witnesses carrying JW.org signs. In other words, Jehovah's Witnesses who just want to help fellow believers. In a recent video, I read the verse from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:46 and 47. For if you love those loving you, what reward do you have? Are not also the tax collectors doing the same thing? And if you greet your brothers only, what extraordinary thing are you doing? Are not also the people of the nations doing the same thing? I'm an atheist. I no longer believe that Jesus was the Messiah or that he had any unique wisdom to share with mankind. And yet I'm apparently more familiar with the words of Jesus than Jehovah's Witnesses, than the makers of this propaganda. How can they not see the way they're telling this story of this tragedy and the way Jehovah's Witnesses responded, and not see that their mentality of only looking out for their own followers runs directly contrary to the message of Jesus Christ, to the message of Christianity? And then you have this bizarre roundup of the story by Ralph Walls, who talks about the way the Roma community responded.
At first, other Roma who had been left behind blamed the flood on the family because they were all studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. But after they observed the assistance provided by the brothers and sisters, they said, "You have the true religion. You show genuine love."
I think what's probably happened here is that one person has said that. One person has said, you must be the true religion because you look out for your own believers, which isn't remotely what all religions do, look out for their own. Yours is the true religion. You have genuine love. I think probably one person has said that. And maybe even one person in the community blamed the flood on the Jehovah's Witness family. And it's just that whole thing where everything just gets spun out of context. And what's important is the propaganda message, the propaganda value, so that they have to include this silly story on the end, which, if you think about it, is quite patronizing because it portrays the Roma community as somehow backward, as somehow overly superstitious in blaming a natural disaster on one family just because they were studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. How can the words of presumably one or two people be held as representative of what an entire community says? And by the same token, how can it be suggested or implied that the entire community supports or endorses Jehovah's Witnesses just because presumably one or two people got carried away and saw the way Jehovah's Witnesses look after their own and drew fanciful conclusions based on that? The way the whole story is told, for me, is suspect. It screams propaganda. It screams exploitation. When disaster strikes, Jehovah's Witnesses are, number one, interested in saving their own, in looking after their own, and if possible, they will milk the disaster for propaganda value to try to suggest that based on this terrible thing happening, guess what? The best religion to join is Jehovah's Witnesses.